तीरयेत् शृण्वतां स्वकथकृष्णः पुण्यश्रवणकीर्तनः हृदयन्तोऽस्ति हि भद्राणि विदुनोति सुहृत्सताम् नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवति उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय. Okay, so in the previous sessions, we took 2 sessions. In those sessions, we spoke of chapter 15, and that has to do with the retirement of the Pandavas, into the forest after the departure of Krishna. After Krishna unmanifests his pastimes, the Pandavas depart, and that departure and retirement is the topic of the 15th chapter. So for several chapters, we have been talking about retirement. We have been talking about withdrawing from the activities of the world and focusing in a more deeper way, with deeper absorption into the path of devotional service. And this is being discussed right at the outset in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam. Insight, which is being given in Srimad Bhagavatam, is also categorically arranged. It is arranged very efficiently for people to be able to take advantage and to understand, in one sense, what would be required for deeper absorption. So deeper absorption in devotional service does require the establishment of a devotional identity. The entire process of sadhana bhakti is to foster and strengthen and to stabilize the devotional identity. So we spoke about it for 2 sessions. We spoke about the fact that we come in touch with sadhus, we get initiated, and once we start chanting sincerely, or once we start chanting, literally coming in touch with the devotees and then starting to chant the Mahamantra paves the way for the future. So the mantra that we chant has the capacity to create a future for us. So a future is arranged based on the mantra's desires. So what we do within our sadhana is to focus on Harinam. Harinam practically creates a future for us because it changes our desires. So there's a manifestation of change which occurs in the heart. What we thought of as being important in the past becomes secondary, becomes tertiary. We start bringing forth the identity of being Krishna's servant to the forefront, and that is the subject matter of practically every class. It is the subject matter of every gathering, every festival. It is the subject matter also of our daily existence in Krishna consciousness, where there are constant adjustments being made to our existence to foster and strengthen this identity. And the reason this is required is because one can't really understand activity without establishing an identity. An identity is required to establish dharma. An identity is required for us to understand what is duty within that identity. So the deeper and deeper absorption in an identity, greater would be the clarity as to what is duty. The greater the absorption in devotional service, greater would be the sambandha between us and Krishna. Sambandha literally is the relationship. Deeper the relationship between us and Krishna, greater and greater would be our understanding of the activities performed in the relationship. Yeah, if everybody could go on mute. For some reason, there was some static. Yeah, I think everybody is on mute. There was some issue here. So deeper and deeper absorption into the practice of Krishna consciousness strengthens sambandha. Sambandha gyan is knowledge of our identity in relationship with Krishna. Deeper absorption strengthens this knowledge. It fosters a deeper understanding of who we are in relationship to Krishna. Once this becomes more and more evident to us as to who we are, we pass through different stages. In the initial stage, we come to the understanding that we are servants of the Lord. It is a much broader understanding. And as we progress through the process of anartha nivarti, anarthas are those activities that have no meaning in Krishna consciousness. Essentially, anarthas are a compound word. It is anartha. Artha is that which has meaning. Anartha is that which has no meaning, no basis, no link to Krishna consciousness. So as we go deeper into the process of removing these anarthas, which is called anartha nivritti, the revelation of who we are in relationship to Krishna becomes more and more and more evident. So we reach a stage from coming in touch with a powerful spiritual master, a spiritual, I would say, a practitioner of spirituality, sadhu. And from that sadhu, we receive faith. His faith destroys ignorance within our heart and establishes itself. And once we follow the instructions received at that point in time, faith grows. Faith requires watering. Like we water a seed, it becomes a small plant, it starts fructifying, then it grows larger and larger and starts yielding fruit, like the fruit, like the tree of bhakti. Any tree basically grows from one stage to the other. It requires care, it requires fostering, it requires a lot of, I would say, attention. So in that sense, the more and more we water the bhakti which has been sown into our hearts by coming in touch with the sadhu, the watering process is through coming in touch with Harinam, coming in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam, coming in touch with more sadhus, coming in touch with Krishna's activities in the Dham, coming in touch with the deity or the murti of Krishna and Radharani. When we come in touch with these very special aspects of Krishna consciousness, these aspects of Krishna consciousness strengthen and water the seed of faith which has been sown into our hearts by sadhus. And sometimes this process can take more than a lifetime. A seed of faith has been sown, it has not been watered properly, but it is there. It takes a longer period of time until the person figures out that this is what I'm supposed to do, and they start acting upon it. So the next stage, of course, is once you have the anartha nivritti, where you start removing and identifying things, saying, this is something which doesn't make sense. This is not activity which is a top priority for me because I have other things to do, and I have, in connection with Krishna, I need to foster this connection. So this particular activity that I'm engaging in, the amount of time that I'm spending in this activity does not seem efficient. I need to modify, reject, move this out of the way. So this process of practically weeding out activity based on multiple priorities set by different identities that we have assumed in this world over a period of time is called anartha nivritti. And then we slowly, steadily develop a deeper understanding of our identity, of who we are in relationship with Krishna. This understanding of who we are in relationship with Krishna gives us a very good clarity, gives us clarity and gives us steps on how to serve him. Because if you don't understand your relationship, how are you going to serve? Service follows an understanding of the relationship. Service follows a deeper understanding of who we are in relationship to Krishna. If we know who we are in relationship to Krishna, then we automatically have a much better chance of understanding his desires. Because we would know there's a greater level of proximity, there's a definition of who we are in terms of his relationship, so we know what duties to perform at what time. Yeah, just as much as a mother would know naturally when to feed the child. There's an instinct born in the mother, but also the function of being a mother, literally being related to someone as a mother, also brings forth natural tendencies of understanding when to perform their duties and how to perform their duties, etc. So this is very critical. Now, the whole idea of being empowered, receiving power for us to be able to serve Krishna is directly proportionate to the process of understanding who we are in relationship to Krishna. There's a deeper connection between who we are in relationship to Krishna and being enabled to serve him. So Krishna can use us. You see? The more and more a devotee is surrendered to the prospect of and the identity of being associated with Krishna, to that extent, that devotee has made himself or herself available for Krishna to use. To that extent, the devotee has made himself or herself available for Krishna to use. the resistance to being used by Krishna and the blocking of Krishna consciousness occurs by other priorities and other identities that we have established. The greater and greater one involves themselves with Krishna consciousness, and greater and deeper their understanding of their identity with Krishna, greater and deeper would their power be in being able to serve Krishna as well. Empowerment is a matter of being able to step aside so that Krishna could use us. When one develops love for Godhead, they have the ability to step aside because they don't have any doubts about the intentions of Krishna. They also have the ability to allow Krishna to pass through because they do not have any other identity other than the service to Krishna and the relationship with Krishna. So we notice this with Srila Prabhupada and many other predecessors in our lineage, where at very advanced ages, Srila Prabhupada had the ability to travel to America, to the West. He had the ability to go around the world, establish 108 temples, raise devotees who had practically zero understanding of the Vedic paradigm and Vedic culture. Prabhupada was so powerful and he carried Krishna in him so powerfully because Srila Prabhupada stepped aside. Krishna's Shakti was flowing through Prabhupada so powerfully that Srila Prabhupada practically had the ability to take someone who had no connection with the Vedic paradigm. He had the ability to give them religiosity, dharma. He had the ability to give them their spiritual, I would say, the ability to kind of give them the seed of spirituality in such a powerful way that they could basically develop themselves. And all in a sudden, within a matter of years, a couple of years, you had these very young people from the West who had no connection to Vedic paradigm. They had no connection to the rituals and the so many different intricacies of a completely different part of the world, who suddenly became more attuned than a local person. They became more attuned to Krishna consciousness than most, Indians of those times. So this is quite fascinating to see that this is power. Srila Prabhupada could literally tell someone, go to this country, Krishna will help you. And that person would receive Krishna consciousness from Prabhupada. They would go to a different country, Krishna will help them. So Srila Prabhupada practically displayed this phenomenon of carrying empowerment. Empowerment is the ability to step aside. Fundamental rule of empowerment is to step aside. Why does one step aside is the question. Why does one step aside when there is empowerment? Why does one step aside when they're advanced? Why is it that the advanced devotees have the capacity to step aside, while devotees who are not advanced struggle to step aside and allow Krishna to use them? Why is there this phenomenon of being able to step aside, which is easier for those who are advanced? The reason is very simple. Those who are advanced practically have absolutely great compassion for what needs to be done. They see suffering, so they see a need for power. They see a lot of suffering around them, and they see a need for power. And this understanding of suffering is very different when it comes to devotees. Once, when Srila Prabhupada was walking with his devotees, with his disciples in America, they were taking a walk adjacent to a golf course, a well-situated neighborhood. They were passing by a golf course and they were taking their morning walk. Srila Prabhupada stood there and he was watching somewhat older white men playing golf. These were very affluent, rich people. They were much older in the sense that they were closer to retirement or perhaps into retirement. Srila Prabhupada observed them. They were very absorbed in playing golf in that rich neighborhood in America. And the devotees who were with Srila Prabhupada, the disciples, literally could see tears come in Srila Prabhupada's eyes. Tears started welling up in Srila Prabhupada's eyes. They wondered, what is it which made Prabhupada feel so sad about that vision, that sight of people who were well situated, they were very wealthy, they were in a very wealthy situation, and they were actually engaging in some kind of sense gratification. They were playing a game. What is it which made Prabhupada cry? So Prabhupada did not generally, I would say, in point which I'm trying to make is, compassion is not so much about seeing suffering of someone going through some terrible times. Compassion is a matter of understanding that you are so old, you're older than most people are, you have been well educated, you have no worries in life because you have been given wealth, yet you waste time pushing a little ball into a hole, and the whole afternoon goes by, and you think that is the pinnacle and the summit of life. Srila Prabhupada practically was crying because he said, these old men, they don't realize they're going to die. They just don't realize that they're going to die and they're going to come back as animals, or maybe perhaps in worse circumstances. There they are wasting the most precious moments of life. They are wasting precious moments of life trying to play a game like children. So Srila Prabhupada literally was crying out of compassion, saying, this is just a complete waste, and people do not even know the essence of life, and they're wasting their time in this manner. And this was quite unusual. So when someone can see suffering when it is not very apparent, when someone can see suffering when it is not very apparent, how many people will feel like crying seeing rich old men playing golf? Yeah, we don't even see them suffering. But when someone can see them suffering, while apparently it can't be seen by everyone, then they are basically crying because they understand that I am in such deep separation from Krishna. I am in such deep separation from Krishna. And it is such a heavy, heavy, heavy situation of being away from Krishna's company. How is it possible for someone in this planet to be preoccupied with a game when they do not even know Krishna, when they haven't made no attempt to come to Krishna? So it's very difficult for someone who is very advanced to be in our environment, because they would see suffering everywhere. Because for them, suffering essentially is separation from Krishna. Separation from Krishna, and that particular separation from Krishna, when they see it, they feel overwhelmingly compassionate, because they feel you are suffering. And this has nothing to do with the material condition. Materially, that person could be a king. But when the devotee, advanced devotee, is seeing him, he realizes he is suffering. Even though the person could be a king, he realizes you're suffering. You're in separation from the Lord, you're suffering. He realizes it. Yeah? Like, for example, you see animals like a pig. A pig is wallowing in the sewage, in the drain water. It's practically lying down in all kinds of filth. The pig doesn't realize that that is suffering. But for someone who is of an advanced consciousness, a human being, when he sees the pig, they realize that the pig is suffering. Yeah? The pig doesn't realize it. It's very difficult for the pig to realize that it is suffering, because it is conditioned to believe that this is enjoyment. But an advanced human being with more intellect is able to see that it's wallowing in filth, it's wallowing in the sewage water and drain water, and this is nothing but suffering. In a similar manner, a resident of the spiritual sky, when they see us, they can see suffering, because they realize that this is not natural and this is great suffering. They realize it when they see us. So this particular need for empowerment, the first principle of empowerment, is to develop compassion. Developing compassion where you overwhelmingly feel a need to assist others in coming closer to Krishna. This is compassion. An overwhelming need to assist others in coming closer to Krishna. This is compassion. Overwhelming. They feel overwhelmed. They are ready to put their lives at risk. They're ready to do anything so that someone else's suffering ends, and their suffering is basically separation from Krishna. They are overwhelmingly wanting to do things so that they can bring others closer to Krishna. But along with this overwhelming need to assist others, there is also deep humility. There is deep humility. They realize, I have a great aspiration to assist others, but I don't have the power to assist others. So true power, true empowerment has two ingredients. The two ingredients of empowerment are, there has to be a need, and that need is defined by compassion. I'm extraordinarily overwhelmed by compassion of wanting to assist others who are suffering. This is a need. This is the first foundation for empowerment. Then this has to be supported. This has to be supported in addition with power. Along with this particular need of wanting to assist, the devotee also realizes that I don't have the ability to assist because this requires enormous power. You see this in Srila Prabhupada's writings when he came into Boston Harbor. He was literally saying this entire population is covered over in passion and ignorance. Krishna, how am I supposed to give you your very lofty message to them? How am I supposed to share the sublime message of Krishna consciousness with an entire population which is filled with passion and ignorance? Now, along with this need of wanting to distribute Krishna consciousness, which is enormous compassion of Prabhupada, there was also a sense of helplessness. There was also a sense of helplessness which comes out of humility. So this is the state of mind and state of consciousness of an advanced devotee. They have extraordinary compassion. They also feel extraordinarily humble that I can't do anything because I don't have the power. So because they are humble and they have a need to give Krishna consciousness, which is also the interest of Krishna, Krishna takes over. He says, you are compassionate. You want to do what I want to do, but you're also humble enough to recognize that this requires even greater potency and power. So I'm going to come and I'm going to fill that void. So when a devotee develops deep compassion to the point where they want to give Krishna consciousness to the entire universe, but they are humble enough to realize that they don't have the capacity to do so, then Krishna takes over. Krishna takes over. This was displayed at first by Sri Advaita Acharya. Advaita Acharya was an incarnation of Mahavishnu. While he sat on the banks of the river Ganga in Sri Mayapur Dham, he sat near Sri Ganga Devi's river, and then he basically sat and he started worshipping his shaligram. His prayers were for Lord Chaitanya, for Krishna and Radharani to descend. Please come and start your pastimes because I can see great suffering and I want to deliver them. I don't have the power to do so. It's for you to come. So he was practically begging them to come, and his compassion of Advaita Acharya was such that it drew Lord Chaitanya into Gaur Leela. He practically brought down the divine couple. He invited them through his compassion. He invited them through his compassion. In a similar fashion, you have Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada coming here to America, for instance, and wanting to help, but feeling completely helpless. This is the true consciousness of an advanced devotee. So I was just giving you the ingredients for power. The ingredients for being able to serve are compassion and humility. Deep compassion is required because deep compassion means we have become selfless and we are seeing the suffering of others. Humility is required so that we could step away from our own inabilities, our own lack of intelligence, our own lack of capability, and beg Krishna, recognizing that yes, there's a great task ahead because I want to serve others and I don't have the power to do so. So I'm stepping aside, so I require your help. So this ability to step aside is humility. This is required. This is required. This movement is not being managed by the intellect and the capacity of the participants of this movement. It is not. This movement is being managed by Krishna's spiritual potency, by the potency, internal potency. As a consequence, Krishna's Yogamaya potency, the internal potency, basically is arranging for this entire movement to move. A movement requires movement, which is literally to move. It is not stationary. So it's quite dynamic. Different arrangements get made. Different parts of the world get energized at different situations. So different parts of the world receive mercy in different ways. This is quite extraordinary because this movement is dynamic, and these dynamic arrangements are being made, and Krishna fills the void of power when he sees that there is enough compassion. Why is it that our temples take 10, 15 years to build? Why is it that a regular Hindu temple or a church, which is supposed to meet the needs of regular people who are going there on Sundays and Saturdays, wanting to ask for help to fix their lives, that gets built within a year? Our temples and our particular movement, its entire existence is being designed for everyone who is participating to gain purity and for them to be able to move forward. So anything you do in this movement, anything, as much as we would want to think that this is not, a circumstance which can be, I would say, which basically is disconnected. We would want to think that there's confusion in certain environments, as much as we would want to be tempted to think that this basically is not connected to Krishna. The fact is, it is connected to Krishna. So this power to assist others comes into a particular kshetra, into a particular region, into a particular group of people, into a particular congregation, when they become sufficiently compassionate and they also have humility. This principle of compassion and humility is required at an individual level. It is required at the level of a congregation. When the congregation becomes sufficiently compassionate and develops sufficient humility, they do wonderful things. All kinds of wonderful things start manifesting. Wonderful things start manifesting when the congregation is able to do so. So these two ingredients, how do we develop compassion and how do we develop humility? These are very, very important embankments. Literally, for us to be able to move forward, we require compassion, humility, because these are ingredients. Someone was compassionate towards us, and someone was humble enough to step aside so that the parampara could use them and give us Krishna consciousness. How do we position ourselves to have the same kind of empowerment? How do we position ourselves for this kind of wonderful power? Power is required, resources are required, money is required. We don't want to be blind. Yeah, these are real requirements. These are real requirements because there's a practical need for resources in any situation in this world. But resources themselves are not the key. Great resources were left behind. Forget about Srila Prabhupada. Go back 500 years when Mahaprabhu came and distributed Krishna consciousness. By the time Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, by the time Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur came in the early part of the 18th, 19th century, all the Gaudiya literature was almost lost. There were few copies found here and there. Can you imagine? This is Krishna Chaitanya himself who descends in 15th century, and 300 years later, our acharyas who descended, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, they were struggling to find copies of the works of the predecessors. This is 300 years, and this was God, Krishna himself, who descended. That is how quickly things can get covered in material energy. That is how quickly people can forget Krishna consciousness. Very quickly. Because this is very special, it can get covered over. Yeah? So the point we are trying to make is that in general, resources in themselves don't matter. They're required, but that is not the primary ingredient which are going to keep them on the planet. It is not. Every time a great acharya comes, a great personality comes and then leaves and departs, every time a great personality comes and leaves and he departs, then you would find confusion, you would find breakdown, you would find obliteration, literally demolition of many resources. Yeah, all our temples in Vrindavan were destroyed. All our temples in Vrindavan were destroyed during the 17th century. Aurangzeb, 16th, 17th century. He practically destroyed all the temples here. It was covered over. There were many upper sampradayas who claimed to be Gaudiyas, who took connections with Lord Chaitanya, but they were proclaiming and passing messages on, which were very confusing. At the same time, some of them were deviant, very deviant. It was very confusing. What is very confusing is if someone were to come dressed as a sadhu and they were to deliver a message, but that is not the real message. That is far more damaging than you will have someone who is claiming to be an atheist who is trying to do things. Because the atheist can be identified, someone who is dressing up and then who speaks the language of a sadhu, and he comes and presents himself, or she comes and presents himself, and then start distorting the message of the Bhagavad, distorting the message of the Bhagavad Gita, then you have great confusion. This was happening after Mahaprabhu's departure. Temples got destroyed. So the point I'm trying to make is resources in themselves are not important in one sense, because those resources will get destroyed if the purpose for which the resources were created is not known by those who are going to follow. So that is not important. It is important when you're trying to execute a mission. Money is required, resources are required, people are required. This is important, but that is not the key. That is not the key. Compassion establishes a need. You can't preach without compassion. If our preaching is without compassion to that extent, it will not be effective. We may be able to we may actually be quite limited. We may be limited in doing what can be done. Without humility, you cannot attract resources. And I'm talking about spiritual resources from Krishna. If you're not humble, if we are not humble, we start thinking that we already have everything we need to spread the mission. Then why would Krishna help? When a person starts thinking that they already have everything, why would anybody give them anything? When we already start thinking that we are so capable that we can take it on, we can do all these things, why would Krishna help? So there is a need to recognize that there's a need for spreading the movement. There is also a need for humility. Without humility, it is not possible to receive Krishna in the heart. Because with humility, the congregation, individual devotees, leaders of the congregation, they would all realize that we want to do wonderful things, but we don't have the power. They would realize that. They would really be praying very hard like the predecessor acharyas did. They would be praying very hard, holding on to their beads and crying out saying, I want to help, but I can't because I don't know how to do so. This is not a matter of low self-esteem. This is a matter of understanding that great things want to be done. You want to really take over the world, but you just don't have the capacity to do so. But you have a very good reason to do so. You have a great, wonderful reason of wanting to be compassionate and give Krishna consciousness, give mercy to the whole world. But at the same time, you don't have the power. This requires humility, because when you have humility, we will be able to step aside. Humility would allow us to step aside. When we step aside, Krishna will take over. Krishna will start driving the car of life in general. I'm talking about where we want to go. This is true for us as an individual. This is true for a congregation. It is true for the entire movement. Now, why are we speaking of humility and compassion? These are two main embankments. These are two main requirements for us to be able to move forward, to serve, to preach, because ours is a dynamic preaching movement. We need to have both these ingredients. How can we receive the two ingredients? Both of these ingredients are very generously given to a sincere chanter of Harinam. All we need to do is to focus on Harinam. When we focus on Harinam, the gift of compassion and the gift of humility would come automatically. It would be given as we make further and further and further advancement in Krishna consciousness. The lesser and lesser and lesser would be the identification with material surroundings and with our body. Lesser and lesser and lesser identification with the body, and greater identification with our spiritual self would practically deprioritize the need for respect. Amani manadena. Giving everybody respect and not expecting anything for oneself is a very natural condition because the devotee has become lesser and lesser body conscious. Greater the body consciousness, greater identification with who we are, this body, its surroundings, greater would be the need for respect. Greater would be the need for recognition. Greater would be the need for our own place and situation, etc. So this is a directly, I would say, inversely proportional, situation where one's chanting improves and one's sadhana improves, they increase their ability to identify with their spiritual self. Once they increase their identity to identify with the spiritual self, which is meaning the sambandha between them and Krishna becomes more clear, the relationship becomes more clear, lesser would be the body consciousness. Lesser the body consciousness, it would be a natural situation of humility because they are not conscious of the body. They don't require anything for the body in terms of respect, recognition, which is the true cause of all kinds of conflicts because we think someone has not respected us. And greater the humility, greater the ability to step away so that we could allow Krishna to come in. How do you step away? Prayers. The prayers in the heart would become very, very sincere. They would recognize their inability and they would offer prayers so that Krishna, Mahaprabhu himself can take over. So there's a need for compassion, there's a need for humility. Both of these are going to be wonderfully met by the chanting of Harinam. Sincere chanting of japa, sincere chanting of Harinam practically bestows upon one both these wonderful qualities. So what is the summary? The summary is chanting of Harinam is the route for being able to serve the movement of Lord Chaitanya. If you want to serve the movement of Lord Chaitanya, if you want to spread this movement throughout the world, there's a need for deeper absorption in chanting. Deeper absorption in chanting would produce humility, it would produce compassion. These are two main ingredients that are required. Compassion creates the necessity for power. Power comes to us when we realize we don't have any, and Krishna recognizes that that power will be situated within us without disturbing any arrangement of his. Yeah? So he empowered Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada carried Krishna Shakti. He had the enormous potency. He would tell anyone, go there, start a movement there, go to this particular country, travel to this particular, arrangement. People who are not very, very educated would suddenly find themselves to become scholars because they were in touch with Srila Prabhupada. It was quite fascinating. They had nothing to do with the Vedic paradigm. They became expert pujaris. They became expert this and expert that. All kinds of expertise came in because Srila Prabhupada was around. But how did this power flow through Srila Prabhupada? Srila Prabhupada was humble enough to make a statement to Krishna saying, Krishna, how can I deliver this population? They seem to be filled with passion and ignorance. Where is my capacity? Where is my capacity to make them understand my language? How can I help them understand the language of Srimad Bhagavatam? They seem to be filled with ignorance. This statement of Srila Prabhupada is seen in the Jaladuta prayers, the prayers that he offers to Krishna en route to America from India in 1965. Yeah? En route, while in the ship, he basically is offering prayers. So the first and foremost, what we wanted to share today, and why did we share this particular fact about power, humility, and compassion today? It was because in this chapter, early on in the chapter, we read through the whole chapter in the previous two sessions. Arjuna, he goes and he is bringing the wives and the children of Krishna. He is moving them from Dwaraka to a different place. He wants to bring them to Hastinapur. On the way, there were robbers and thieves, cowherd robbers and thieves, not sophisticated Kshatriya robbers who were well trained. These were cowherd men who were robbers and thieves. They practically come and attack that particular procession where Arjuna is leading. And Arjuna had his Gandiva, and he was sitting on his chariot. He had all his weapons. He could not invoke any of his weapons. They come and they even kidnap the wives of Krishna. It is quite fascinating to see that Arjuna becomes very reflective, saying, this particular Gandiva bow and all my weapons, they were basically used even to fight battles, that to assist the demigods. The demigods used to seek the assistance of Arjuna. And here, Arjuna could not even protect the family of Krishna after Krishna's departure. So he begins very deep reflection of where this power was. This power which I had, it disappeared along with Krishna. I wanted to serve him in certain ways, so he gave me the power. The same personality then took away the power. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, based on the different Puranas, he talks about the fact that the cowherd men who stole the family of Krishna, created disturbance to the women, who have wives of Krishna. They were also expansions of Krishna. It was not that some third-party materialistic men could molest and cause harm to Krishna's wives. Only Krishna could touch Krishna's wives. Otherwise, they would disappear. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur shares the opinion that as Arjuna was bringing Krishna's family from Dwaraka back to Hastinapur after Krishna's disappearance, that procession was attacked by thieves. These thieves were expansions of Krishna himself. Arjuna could barely lift his weapon. He couldn't do anything. This is a confirmation given by Acharyas by reference in two different Puranas, different scriptures. Otherwise, there was no way for them to do so. They could not have touched. But what is reflective is, Arjuna begins to reflect. He starts thinking, this Gandiva, this great bow and all my weapons, all the divine weapons, I defeated Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva, being pleased, granted me his weapon. The demigods, after seeing me defeat Lord Shiva in battle, granted me their weapons. I was completely blessed with all kinds of weaponry and all kinds of capability, all kinds of power. This was Krishna's arrangement. Because Arjuna was a dear devotee, and Arjuna basically existed to please Krishna, Krishna practically empowered him. Krishna practically empowered him. Krishna's departure practically made all the relevant powers disappear as well from Arjuna. And Arjuna started reflecting that this is all given by Krishna and Krishna has taken it away. So the point being, deeper the relationship and greater the understanding of one's relationship with Krishna. That is the starting point of our mission. Until then, there's a struggle to understand the desires of Krishna, and there's a struggle to serve him. Our struggle in service is directly related to our lack of sambandha. Why is it that devotees struggle? Devotees struggle in their service, devotees struggle in keeping themselves together as a group in service because there's lack of sambandha. Krishna sambandha is low. There is a lack of sambandha. How do you increase sambandha gyan? How do you foster and increase and deepen your absorption of your identity in Krishna consciousness? Through the chanting of Harinam. Whenever there's a disturbance in sadhana in a congregation, it essentially means that they also have forgotten the Lord and they're completely caught up in the immediate surroundings of trying to facilitate certain things. And as a consequence, all kinds of conflicts, all kinds of differences come. Differences come because there's a lack of appreciation of Harinam. Deeper Harinam would make one soft-hearted, more compassionate, more selfless towards the needs of others. Deeper Harinam would increase one's absorption and their connection to Krishna as a servant of Krishna. Meaning the sambandha will be very high. Deep Harinam means deep sambandha. And as sambandha is very high, then they also have the ability to be proper instruments in the hands of Krishna. Until then, there's a struggle. There's a struggle in situating oneself to be used by the Lord. because we are struggling because we are trying to work within our capacity. But once we become deeper and deeper in Krishna consciousness, when we go deeper in Krishna consciousness, then we automatically develop the ability to be situated as servants of Krishna, and we also have the ability to step aside so that Krishna could use us in his service. Once someone asked me in a class saying, how can they improve their service? And I told them, chant Harinam. Why? Because if you chant Harinam with absorption, your Sambandha Gyan will increase. Your idea of who you are in relationship with Krishna will increase. In quality, you will increase that. And once you increase that, then there's a greater possibility of us being able to allow ourselves to be used, just as a slave would allow himself or herself to be used by the master. The moment the slave starts thinking that I have other priorities, the master can't use them. So Harinam, deeper absorption in Harinam, allows us to become very absorbed in the identity of being Krishna's servant, slave, you want to call it. Das basically is better translated as a slave rather than servant. Das, dasi. Those who don't have any freedom, those whose identity is related only to the master. Deeper absorption in that identity, greater the ability to serve. Deeper sambandha means better abhideya. Abhideya is abhida, to follow orders and to execute activities. After understanding sambandha, once one understands their sambandha, the relationship, greater would be their ability to act according to the master's desire. Greater would be their ability. They will not allow anything to interfere. There'll be no issues whatsoever. So I'm going to stop here. We conclude chapter 15, and the next week we'll take on chapter 16. Next week is also the onset of Kartik. In Vrindavan, in some places they start Kartik with Ekadasi, others they start with the Purnima. So anyways, wish everybody a very happy Kartik season, the month of Kartik. Any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hari Bol.
Hare Bol. Priyanka here. I just want to ask, what should be our mood when we serve? Because I don't know, like whether it should be I, whether it should be we, what kind of mood we should have, or it should be neither of those.
I'll give you an easier suggestion when you want to serve. The easier suggestion would be that even before you set out and go to the temple environment, even before you set out and want to interact with the devotees of the Lord, sit down in reflection before your deities at home and request them for protection so that you could serve nicely. Start with a prayer. When you reach there, in your heart, keep chanting. That is enough for you to have the right attitude, for us to have the right attitude to be able to serve. So it's not so much of a philosophical or methodical understanding. Mm-hmm. It is better to submit to something far more powerful above our intellect, and that is Harinam. And Harinam practically would also make us better servants, because we are literally telling Krishna, may your activities and your service be the greatest and only source of pleasure for me. So basically, that would be the best way to go about it.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu.
Not at all. Any other question or comment?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, this is Padmavati Nityanatha.
Hare
Since
Krishna.
you made a comment, I really felt this class is fully for me. I just wanted to say that, and it's such a wonder. I really felt the Lord reciprocated with my prayers. The total whole class is for me. Every word you mentioned.
Thank you for sharing that, because in reality, this is not, I would say, it is not unusual. And I'll tell you why. Because as a preacher, as someone who is trying to share scripture, share realizations, my ability to speak and my presentation is also closely connected to the audience. If a certain message has to be conveyed, I start receiving those realizations, then I'm able to share them. So it is not very surprising if someone were to say that they felt as if they basically were being given certain things in a class, because Krishna arranges in such ways that he can basically reach out to us.
That's true. Yeah. Thank you again, Prabhu. Thank you very much, and wishing you a very wonderful, blissful Kartik. Thank you for
Thank you. Wish you the same. Wish everybody the same as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else who has a question?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, Rajiv.
Quick question. Nowadays there's a lot of emphasis on, dealing with, like the self-help kind of things, dealing with your, mental health, and it extends into preaching as well. And a lot of the time you hear about this kind of stuff in classes, and it's almost like you have to become like an expert in psychology to become Krishna conscious. But so my question is that necessary, or can we rely solely on Harinam?
I would say a bit of both, and the reason is as follows. It is completely contextual. If there is an audience whose faith has developed to such an extent that they can simply rest their entire faith and entire understanding on scripture and Harinam, etc., then we give and strengthen the process of chanting of the holy names, which is what we are doing in these sessions. These sessions tend to be closer to scripture, tend to be closer to, kind of strengthening our process rather than giving, I would say, giving kind of examples of how to deal with the mind. You see, in reality, I would say that if you have a more secular audience, an audience which basically would like to kind of hear things from the perspective of how to manage the mind and the metaphysics of how the subtle body is constructed, then you might want to address it. So I'll give you an example here. In our system, we basically simply divide material energy into 3 different levels of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Our acharyas in the bhakti yoga paradigm, they don't really see a need to break it down any further. But if you go deeper into other disciplines of spirituality, like for example, the worshippers who follow certain kriyas and kriya yoga, something which is closely attuned with the Ashtanga yoga path, which also combines tantric practices, etc., meaning, hatha yoga in combination with mantras, etc. They basically break down the existence into even deeper aspects, and they break it down into smaller nuggets of how things interact. So they say that, they talk about the 5 elements, the fundamental creation. So the point I'm trying to make is that a greater level of detail of how the body and its components work, that includes the mental situation of how the psychology operates, etc., becomes necessary when there is, I would say, in some ways, a lack of our ability to imbibe principles of bhakti yoga. Yeah, so it becomes necessary. But that in bhakti yoga, our whole system it's not an ascending process; it's a descending process. We are basically not trying based on our abilities to reach Godhead. We are basically trying to submit ourselves so that God can come into our beings in a better way. We're trying to kind of position ourselves to receive mercy, which is our business. So there's a little bit of a distinction in terms of how much do you need to know about the workings of the mind in Bhakti Yoga? I would say not much at all, because ours is a descending process. We need to know how to submit ourselves. Yeah, that's our process. Our process is all about surrender. It's all about being able to submit ourselves. But in a different process, which is ascending, they need to know how to control the different aspects of matter. They need to know the different components of how the subtle body operates. And there are very elaborate systems which are available, which describe the subtle body. In our case, we only understand the subtle body as being composed of the mind, intelligence, and false ego, and the soul. So I'm just giving you an example as to how these different aspects have come into our classes, because our classes are kind of drawing upon, I think, people read from outside and they're bringing things in. There are some mention of the different coverings and the conditionings in our scripture too. But our scripture basically focuses on a more fundamental aspect of surrender, because ours is a descending process. We are not so much, dependent on our understanding and our ability to manipulate the different components of the body. Our understanding of how to surrender becomes more prominent. So that's the reason why there's a distinction in our approach. That's why you find that in Srimad Bhagavatam, or Bhagavad Gita, even there's not so much of an elaborate breakdown of the subtle body and the components of the mind. And, there's so much about Vedic psychology, which is there, but then that is not a part of our system because it doesn't require that. The other systems which have a lot of need to have greater control of the different components while they're trying to reach their goals, they do have a lot of information. So there's a distinction in those approaches. So you can take a little bit from there and introduce it here for those who are inquisitive. But if you ever veer away and walk away from the fact that all the knowledge of psychology and all the knowledge of the different components of how the mind works are completely of little use if they don't learn how to surrender, then that really becomes a disservice in our classes. So the principle of surrender, the principle of being able to depend on Nam, the principle of being able to depend on what the acharyas have given us is very important. If that is not included in addition, then it's problematic. Does it make sense, Rajiv?
Yes, thank you, Prabhu. Yeah.
Sure. Is there any other question or comment that I can address?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Is there a danger of trying to be so humble that you think that you can't do anything anyway, and you give up trying to attempt anything, almost?
Sure. I think I get your question. So your question is, can we actually go into a state of inaction because we think we don't have the power? That is one form of false ego, by the way. Thinking that we are the ones who can accomplish everything is false ego. That's because we think everything is dependent on us. And the other kind of false ego, which is the other extreme, is to think that everything is still dependent on us, and because we don't have anything, we can't do much. That's the other kind. That's the other side. So these are two different parities, or I would say polarities, of an unnatural state. So this is not humility. Humility does not equal low self-esteem. It does not, even though it can be confused for low self-esteem. Humility is a state where the devotee deep within is completely aware of his relationship with Krishna. And because of that particular factor, he recognizes that Krishna is the source of all opulences. He recognizes the source of Krishna being the power. But externally, he does what is required as if it depends on him or her. This is the message. The message is that we do what we think we are supposed to do very sincerely. And Krishna automatically gives us the power to accomplish more. So the trick in Bhakti Yoga, and it's a very subtle process, is for us to think that things are dependent on us. while also having an understanding that even if we do everything, the Krishna factor is always present and it may or may not work. So inaction is not what is being recommended. And I'll give you one more very devotional example. Mother Yashoda never looks at Krishna and says, Krishna, you are supreme, you are God, you do not need to be fed. Mother Yashoda looks at Krishna and says, Krishna, you are God, maybe you're God, maybe you're not God. She doesn't have an understanding. Our system says, Mother Yashoda looks at Krishna and says, Krishna, you are dependent on me. When we serve the deities, we start thinking the deity is dependent on us. If we don't go and feed, the deity is dependent on us. You see? So the deity would be hungry, Krishna would be hungry. So our system basically is a system which does what is required based on our understanding to the fullest capability, but leaves the results to Krishna. It is not a matter of inaction. Inaction is not recommended at all. Ours is not a process which is quite. Then the example I'm giving is we don't even assume that Krishna can take care of himself, what to say of his duties. We think that even Krishna needs our help, but also have the understanding that Krishna, even though we are thinking that you need our help, that is our love for Krishna, but in reality, we do our best to serve him, but Krishna can take care of himself. So we don't really go by the philosophy, oh, Krishna can take care of himself, and then we stop serving the deity, etc. We don't do that. So I was just wanting to give you examples that ours is very dynamic. We don't believe in sitting aside. And a lack of disempowerment, feeling low, feeling powerless, is not so much a matter of humility. It is a matter of low self-esteem, which is also a part of thinking that this is dependent on us to such an extent. The distinction between this and what I spoke of is the fact that the devotee in that particular situation is extraordinarily compassionate and wants to do things. Krishna compensates such a devotee with the power required. So the devotee doesn't feel low self-esteem. He's actually confident because he's Krishna's servant. He wants to do so much. And Krishna sees that and says, okay, let me help you from behind. So he does this in the Mahabharata. He helps Arjuna win against all kinds of adversities. He protects Parikshit against all kinds of tribulations. He protects the Pandavas. So he does this from the background. So I was just wanting to make a distinction between the two. Does it make sense what I just explained to you?
Yes, indeed. And I can see there's a danger that you can either become so false ego, or you can go the other extreme, and both things result in false ego. You can go very dependent on me, everything depends on me, and become one way.
Drunk. Yeah.
And then
Drunk with power.
Yeah. And then the other way is also leading to the same thing in a way. So you work with Krishna rather than on your with your own false ego. You're supposed to work with Krishna.
Exactly. We want to understand. We want to understand that this is Krishna's property. We want to understand this is Krishna's service. So the greater and greater our identification with a relationship with Krishna, which is a natural course when we chant the holy names, the attributes of compassion and humility, these are decorations that will adorn a devotee, and it will happen naturally. It's not an artificial imposition. The need to be humble, which is being stressed in so many different classes, is simply to prepare us to understand that it's a need. Because this is not dependent on you fully, because you are a Kripa Siddha. We are Kripa Siddhas. We are dependent on mercy. We are dependent on what descends. We are not in a process which is ascending. It is actually a descending process. And as a consequence, we need to position ourselves correctly. So that's the reason why there's such emphasis on humility in every class. But how do we get there? How do we get humility? How do we get the compassion required to render service? That's simply a matter of Harinam. Simpler said, simpler said than done, but I would say that that's basically Harinam. Absorption in Harinam will automatically give us the gift of compassion and humility to serve.
purify us to that level. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Sure. Anything else?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Now I wanted to ask you, when you said descending, it is just materially, it is that, but spiritually it is ascending, isn't it, Prabhu? Now, when you said descending process, because
Oh, descending process. Yeah, descending process meaning it is not dependent on your effort.
okay,
Ascending process is depending on your effort. Ashtanga yoga is how well you do that and how well you cut things off. It is not dependent on your, it is not dependent on mercy. Very little mercy, lot of effort. This was Treta Yuga, Satya Yuga, very little mercy, lot of effort. In Kali Yuga, lot of mercy, very little effort. So we are a descending process. Mercy is given to us. It is given to us. It is not an ascending process. We are not trying to reach a goal. What is up there is coming down and picking us up. That's what I meant.
yeah, okay, because Harinam has come down from the spiritual world.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
thank you, Hare Krishna.
Anybody else? Okay, if there aren't any more questions, then we will conclude today's session. Next week, we're going to start with chapter 16 of the first canto. So if you could do a little reading on yourself before you come for the next session, chapter 16, it would be much easier and you can participate much better. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.